Morning people, I want to talk about a couple of stories this week, but straight off the bat, this. God damn it, this. George Eustice, Tory MP, ex-government minister, and most insanely of all, former UKIP candidate for the European elections, saying that we should immediately begin negotiations with EU countries to let under 35s come from the EU for 2 years to fill the post-Brexit labour shortages. Well, let's break down how crazy that is. The man was UKIP, the party of Nigel Farage. He was a minister of the Get Brexit Done government that was elected on a manifesto promising to cut immigration in the name of a Brexit that was sold on the basis of cutting immigration, and now he's calling for more immigration. And what's even crazier, he's explicitly calling for immigration from Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Romania, the Baltic states, you know, the people that Nigel Farage said he'd be uncomfortable having as neighbours. And then he wants to broaden it out to the rest of the EU. And he says it will be reciprocal, meaning that we can go to the EU as well, which is great, because it's not like I literally flew to France to warn about the 25,000 British jobs that would disappear if we ended free movement.
At 2016, just before the referendum, there were 25,000 British people that worked across the EU supporting holidays.
We employ 250 people each year. This year we've already dropped by a third.
And here we are with those jobs gone. And his reasons are, we're not allowing people to come here to work in sectors like the food industry, even though there are acute labour shortages in these sectors, and that is contributing to inflation. Inflation being the rate at which prices are going up, i.e. the cost of living. So he's literally saying that the anti-immigration agenda around Brexit is one of the reasons why half of low-income parents are skipping meals to feed their kids. And of course we already knew that because the London School of Economics worked out that Brexit has increased food prices by 6%, and the Bank of England has confirmed that. But to hear that coming from an ex-UKIP Brexiteer is fucking wild. But because he's a Brexiteer and therefore has the integrity of a billionaire's submarine, he insists the inflation isn't because of Brexit, but because of a failure of post-Brexit immigration policy. Hey George, that means it's Brexit. Put it this way. Let's say I have a deal with you and that deal is earning me £1,000. I choose to end that deal and try and renegotiate a new one, but that new deal only gets me a tenner. It would be insane for me to say that my loss of £990 has nothing to do with my decision to end the old deal. But as usual, Brexiteers will always tell you they've got the perfect Brexit deal they could offer you, but she just goes to another school. Because they have to avoid the blame for the damage that Brexit has done to people. He even tried to blame Theresa May for this, saying, the idea of having no temporary visa schemes was not from the Vote Leave campaign. It came predominantly from Theresa May. It was a Remainers' interpretation of what Brexit was about. People wanted controlled immigration and not to pull up the drawbridge and allow no one in at all. This is what Brexiteers have been doing since the start. Present something as if there are only two options, paint one side as extreme so that you can manipulate people towards the option that you want. They did it with the original referendum question, and now they're doing it with immigration. The choices were never completely uncontrolled immigration on one hand versus pulling up the drawbridge and never allowing anybody in ever again on the other. For starters, the rules of EU free movement mean that you can move to another EU country if you either have a job there or have enough money and medical insurance that you're not a burden on the welfare state. And on the other side, the Tories have never talked about banning immigration altogether, especially as we've got record levels of immigration right now. But they did come to power on a promise to bring immigration down. Michael Gove promised to reduce immigration the week after the referendum result. And Boris Johnson said that leaving the EU means we can control and reduce immigration. So acting like cutting immigration is just a Remainers' interpretation of the referendum result is gaslighting insanity. But my favourite part was this. It's really important that we rekindle that post-Brexit friendship with our European neighbours. Sorry, what? Boris Johnson likened EU countries to Nazis during the Brexit negotiations. And then George Eustice, like every other Tory MP, decided to make him our Prime Minister. And now he's like, who was it who damaged our relationship with the EU? You ever see a dog fart itself awake and then start barking like it sensed danger? Same energy. So why is this happening and why now? Because all the polls say that the public is thoroughly turned against Brexit, with a clear majority in agreement that it's made us poor. So while it was easy to lie to us about how Brexit would affect us back in the 2010s, and I know, saying it like that makes the sheer timescale of this disaster even more painful. But now that people can feel the effects of Brexit, they can see the Brexit red tape that's adding cost and delays to our economy, and they know that Brexit Britain isn't exactly thriving on the global stage, it's a lot harder to lie to us. Because you can only lie to somebody about things they don't know, like no. For example, I used to work in Brussels alongside the elected members of the European Parliament as they modified and voted on EU law, which made me immune to all the lies about the EU being some dictatorship. And the Tories understand that, so the fact that they're now more willing to tell the truth isn't because they've suddenly become good, honest people. They just realise that the public is immune to their bullshit because we can see the effects of Brexit with our own eyes. To put it in Gen Z language, they can't fuck us around now that we've all found out. But they will try, especially because Labour is refusing to acknowledge that Brexit is a mistake and is using slogans like "Make Brexit work," which leaves a lot of room for other parties and politicians to move in and say, hey, we'll offer you a relationship with the EU that's closer than what Labour's offering. Yeah, we're gonna get Tories offering less economically damaging Brexits than the Labour Party. And don't worry, I'm about to make a video discussing what the hell is happening in Labour right now. But on the topic of the cost of living, the Tory Financial Secretary said this about inflation today.
The number one enemy for us all is inflation. It is hurting all of us, but particularly the poorest in society. And that's why the Prime Minister has it as his number one priority to tackle inflation, because that way we will all feel the benefit of our wage packets.
No, it's obviously not your number one priority, given that the Bank of England says Brexit is making inflation worse, the London School of Economics says so too, and Jacob Rees-Mogg himself says Brexit will make food inflation even worse when you start doing import checks. Hell, George Eustice just said that post-Brexit immigration policy is making inflation worse. The Tories keep acting like there's nothing they can do to help us with the cost of living, but as long as we're outside of the EU single market and therefore there are major trade barriers between us and where we get a third of our food from, there will always be more they can do to help people out of poverty. They're just choosing not to do it. So I really wish that for once the interviewer would pick them up on that every time the Tories say that fighting inflation is their number one priority. But I'm not going to go in on Laura Coonsborough for failing to do that today because her response was quite useful. The Tory was trying to argue that they can't increase pay for public sector workers like teachers, doctors, nurses because that'll increase inflation. And so Coonsborough says,
except when you look at what the pay review bodies themselves say about inflation, they say public sector wages are so far behind the private sector, there is little risk of the government setting a precedent for more inflationary pay rises.
While we're on the topic of journalists, while I was filming this, things kind of kicked off with Sky News' top presenter, Kay Burley, because she posted on Instagram that she was at the summer party of The Spectator, a right-wing magazine, and that while she was there, she hung out with Rishi Sunak, the right-wing Prime Minister. Now, honestly, I wouldn't have that much of a problem with that if she actually did her job and held them to account for the damage they've done. And so I tweeted, "The state of UK journalism. Kay Burley hanging out with the right-wing PM at a right-wing newspaper's office party. The UK is in the worst poverty crisis since 1956, and the PM responsible for it feels comfortable partying with the journalists who are supposed to be holding him to account." And her response was to tell me to boil my head. So can we think about the fact that her response to somebody questioning her professionalism as a journalist was to throw a pretty gruesome insult back at them? I'll say it again, the only reason that people like me even exist is because the mainstream media journalists are not doing their jobs properly. And when called out for it, they throw their toys out the pram. Anyway, let's finish on a lighter note. Fascism and underage war victims. Because Robert Jenrick, or to give him his full title, Robert Jenrick, the ex-housing secretary who tried to help a Tory donor avoid paying £45 million to the local council just weeks before that donor then paid £12,000 to the Tory party. He's also the current immigration minister who ordered an asylum centre to paint over a cartoon of Mickey Mouse because it was too welcoming. And just so we're clear, those cartoons weren't painted for the adult asylum seekers. They were there for the children who've just made a potentially lethal journey across the English Channel to get to the UK after witnessing God knows what in their home country. Those cartoons were there to help those children feel slightly less traumatized. And Robert Jenrick really just said, "Not on my watch." And the thing is, it's not that he's, if you'll excuse the pun, cartoonishly evil. He just doesn't care. It's performative evil. The Tories have been at this for a long time because they know that a lot of their core voters get turned on by cruelty towards foreigners or just anyone progressive. But most importantly, it distracts people from the fact that the Tories have ruined the economy and millions of lives along with it. Have a great week.